your tribes on Sinai's height. In ancient times once gave the law, in cloud and majesty and awe. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. So that hymn that we sing all through Advent season that began as a set of extra verses in another hymn that was sung every night at Vespers called the Magnificat. So they were called antiphons. So you would sing this song you sang all year long, and only at Advent time would you sing these other verses that fit in between it. And we actually sing them in the reverse order in the modern world, but they were sung throughout the Middle Ages. We sing them at the exact reverse order. So we sing the first, the O Come, Emmanuel, that we all know the first verse of usually, was the last one. You sang it right before Christmas week, and all the other ones were kind of leading up to it. But what's important about that is that idea that you can just leave it there because the other kids might come in. What's important about it is that that God has revealed himself in his law. So we started the last time we met talking about the first table of the commandments. So what's important about the first table of the commandments? What do you remember? So we're going to be on lesson 3 today. We did lesson 2 last time, but you might have written this on your notes page. Corbin, do you have your... Huh? No? Okay. Let me go grab you one. Yes.
The first table is about our relationship with God.
Yes, the first table of the law is about our relationship with God. Just go right in this one, Corbin, if you want to take this. Printed a couple extra copies, or had printed a couple extra copies, but it's only if there's a disaster, someone gets shredded, eaten by the cat or something like that, yeah, so it's about about our relationship with God. So the first table of the law, you see the way that Lutherans, along with Catholics and I think Orthodox and Anglicans, number the commandments. I am the Lord your God is number 1. You shall have no other gods before me. Number 2, do not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God. Number 3, remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. So the reason why some other traditions like Presbyterians count 4 there, they break the first commandment into 2 sections. They break it into I am the Lord your God, and then they break it in. The second bit is you shall make no graven images. Because really, really strict Presbyterians or Calvinists won't even have crosses in their church. No images whatsoever. They're like really, really serious about it. No stained glass windows, no pictures, no nothing. So that's a slightly different understanding than we have because that commandment is attached to the I am the Lord your God. We don't think there's anything wrong with having photos of people because it's not about, we're not making a God out of them. We're making it's just an image to help us remember them or something like that. And it's the same way when we do these kind of images. It's attached to worshiping the true God. So yeah, that's the biggest thing about it is, so we know who we are because we know whose we are. We know who we belong to. We know who made us in his own image and now who has the rights to us. And that's a good thing because somebody has rights to us. If it's not God, it's God's enemy, and we want God to be the one who has the rights to us. But then the rest of the commandments are going to flow from that first commandment. So if commandments 1 through 3 are based on our relationship with God, what are commandments 4 through 10 going to be based on? Or what are they going to be to help us set in order? Yeah.
Relationships with others.
Yeah, exactly. Relationships with other people. And one flows from the other because human beings are all made in God's image. Okay? So you start by knowing how do you relate to God, then can you know how to relate to someone who's made in God's image. And that being made in God's image piece What's important about that is that we're similar to him. There's lots of different ways to think about what it means to be made in God's image. It doesn't mean our physical bodies, ladies. That would be weird. Not because God's physically male, but because Jesus is, and it would be a little strange to think of yourself as made in the image of Him, or in having to grow into His likeness when He was male and you're female. That's not what it's about. So it's obviously about other characteristics. So what are some of the other characteristics that make human beings kind of like God, but smaller, like lesser? Compassion. Louder, please. Louder. Imagination, sure. We're creative, right? Huh?
The ability to create other things.
The ability to create other things, right? Exactly. Beavers can do that. They can build a dam, but they do it by instinct. They're not thinking things through and being creative the way you just doodled something there, right? What else? I'd like to use compassion because that's different than affection. Animals feel affection. They can be loyal. They love the people they love, right? But what they can't do is empathize with their enemy. They can't do is sympathize with somebody they don't particularly like and try to see the world through their eyes. So compassion. The word compassion literally means to feel with somebody. What else? One really big one. I mean, these are just a couple examples. You go lots of different directions with these, but there's at least one other really, really big one that distinguishes human beings from every other animal on Earth. Go ahead. I'm gonna pick on you. Can you think of one? Consciousness. We think actually it seems that other creatures do have consciousness, not as advanced as ours, but yeah, even weirdly enough, here's a weird factoid because you learned weird factoids with Pastor Brett. So you have a thing called your gut biome. It's the ecology in your gut that lets you digest food. There's this whole ecosystem going on in your intestines, and it actually reacts to the other people around you. So being around certain people changes what's going on in your belly. And it seems like your biome is conscious of their biome. So it ranges all the way from like bacteria all the way up. So it seems like there's some kind of consciousness in a weird way, but it's not advanced like ours. So, but that's a good one.
Wanting justice?
Huh?
Wanting justice.
Wanting justice. Yep. Yeah. Now again, animals might want revenge. Or you've heard the phrase mama bear, right? Don't get between a mama bear and her cubs. They might be protective, they might want revenge, but they're not going to want justice. Justice is an abstract concept, and that's leading you in the direction I'm thinking is reason, right? Abstractions. We're the only animals that think in abstractions. Even like our closest biological relatives are going to be chimpanzees, most people would say. Chimpanzees don't reason, even though they use things like tools and stuff like that. They seem to be able to put basic ideas together, but it's not the same as reasoning or abstract reasoning, even more importantly. Okay, so once we know how we relate to God, we honor Him. We don't put anything else in His place. We're going to start learning how to treat the people that are made in His image, meaning that you reflect God in a certain way, and so does everyone else around you. If you ever have to go to war, and you're fighting your enemy is still reflecting God in a way that that your dog doesn't, even though you might like your dog better than the person who's shooting at you. Okay? So you have to learn how to treat them well. And everything that we call human rights today, there are whole countries in the world, most significantly for your moment in history, China, that have not signed on to the International Declaration of Human Rights, because they recognize that it has its roots in Christianity, and they don't want that. Okay, so what we call human rights today are actually Christian ideas, and there's a really great scholar. He's not a Christian, but he recognizes this, and he's written a lot about it. He's a historian named Tom Holland. Has written a lot about this. What we call human rights, are actually Christian ideas. Okay, and Jewish ideas before that. So let's look at these 4 commandments. So open up your Bibles to Exodus chapter 20 or Deuteronomy chapter 5, your choice. Okay. And it's good to mark both of those. So you might want to do, if you're going to Exodus, which of course is the first version of the Ten Commandments we have, you might want to go ahead and mark in there next to Exodus, next to chapter 20, write Deuteronomy 5 or DEUT. That's the abbreviation for that. Deuteronomy 5. The word Deuteronomy literally means second law. So it's literally a restatement of all the stories you had in Exodus, written at a slightly different time from a slightly different perspective, but the same events, okay? So in Exodus chapter 20, we're going to be beginning at verse 12. In Deuteronomy chapter 5, we're going to begin at verse 16. Okay. Are any of you in? You guys, which books are you in? Which one did you choose? Exodus. Which book are you in the Bible? Huh? You're choosing Deuteronomy. Okay, so you can keep us on track in both of those. So Deuteronomy, read Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 16 for us, please. You guys pay attention because it's going to be slightly different than yours. Chapter 5, verse 16.
Honor your father and mother as the Lord your God has commanded you so that you may live long and that it may go well with you in the land the Lord your God is giving you.
Okay, excellent. Any difference from what you guys have there in Exodus? Not really. Pretty close.
As the Lord thy God hath commanded thee.
Right. Yep, exactly. Yep. Yeah, they just added that word command in later. So Deuteronomy is written a little bit later. It's reminding the people this was a command. So remember, what's the purpose of God giving them the Ten Commandments first and foremost? Because this is history. It's not just like an idea for us, although we use it that way. What had just happened when God gives the Ten Commandments? The Exodus. So they just escaped from Egypt, right? They'd been in slavery. And now what's going to happen is God's going to give his law. So what is the first set of American laws called? The thing that establishes. So when the Supreme Court wants to decide whether a law is valid or not, what do they measure it against? Constitution. Yep. So God's law is really the Constitution for Israel. Okay. So God gives them this rule. So first you're going to know how to relate to God, who's supposed to be their king. Read Judges to find out how that works because they don't pay much attention to God. And Judges is probably the most horrifying book of the Old Testament. Like the worst possible things happen there. If you want to see people acting badly. Then they know what they're supposed to do and they don't do it. So they also don't treat their neighbors very well. But that's what this commandments 4 through 10 about how you're going to treat each other. Okay? There's going to be other laws, but they all measure up against it. So these 10 commandments are a lot like the Constitution functions for us. This is how the 10 commandments function for the Israelites. So what does it mean to honor your father and mother? Parents like to think that. And when you're little, it probably does. But what if you find as you grow up, like for instance, we just went and watched the Bonhoeffer movie a couple weeks ago. and we'll probably watch it here at church when it comes out. And we'll talk more about it because there's a lot to be talked about in it. It is a piece of historical fiction, so there are some things it gets wrong, but it's still I think a decent movie and worth talking about. So what happens there though is of course that um, sometimes you had parents ordering their kids around to do things that were immoral, right? So you end up in Nazi Germany, you end up having parents fighting their children and children fighting their kids, right? Sometimes the kids have become Nazis and the parents are trying to stay faithful to a better vision and vice versa.
It's respect, right?
It's definitely oriented around respect. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And father and mother language in the Old Testament, especially, but anywhere in the Bible, father and mother language, parents' language, what that is about is your legacy or your heritage, rather, other direction. Legacy is what comes after heritage is what comes before you. Honor your heritage. Remember what it is to be the kind of person you are and what gave the world to you. So every once in a while, like this morning in our prayers today. So we're going to probably, after we decorate the Christmas tree, we might watch the St. Nicholas Veggie Tales. Have you guys seen that? Isn't that cool? I love it. So we're up between Mary Larry and Veggie Tales and St. Nicholas. So yeah.
3 of them voted Mary Larry in the car.
Okay, well we've got Mary Larry too. We can do them all. But last Friday was St. Nicholas Day, the 6th. All right. So December 6th it was St. Nicholas Day at our house. We always celebrated it by the kids would put their shoes out, and then your shoe gets filled with candy and money. It's a Swedish tradition. But this coming Friday is St. Lucy's Day. So have any of you ever had to play Santa Lucia or had a friend who did? So if Julia is, I don't know if she'll be here tonight. She hasn't been a lot because she's been so busy with her competitions for Irish dance. But last year, she's Polish by background. And in the Slavic countries, in Italy, and in the Norwegian countries, the Nordic countries, the northern countries, Santa Lucia is really, really popular. The name Lucy means light. And so she was a young woman who refused to be married. That was one of the reasons why she had committed her life to living. She committed to living only for God and not being married. And her father wanted to marry her off to a pagan, and she refused. And so she was consequently martyred for that. She refused to give up her faith and become a pagan wife that her father wanted her to be. So she wasn't being obedient to her father in a quite literal sense. But her father believed he was doing the right thing. She knew she was doing the right thing. So she was trying to honor what was deepest about her family heritage. But she was also staying faithful to God, keeping to that first commandment where we stay true to God above all things. Well, the reason we remember her is she's part of our heritage. So when Julia last year had to play St. Lucy, so here's what they do, ladies. This is fun if you've never seen this done before. You're Italian by background, so it's very popular in Italy too. They'll pick a young lady of the community, and she gets to be St. Lucy for a day. So she walks into a big St. Lucy's Day festival, and usually there's lots of food. You come in, and there are candles in her hair. So last year, poor Julia was 2 weeks getting the wax out of her hair that had dripped into her hair and frozen into her hair all over the place. But it's considered a great honor to get to play St. Lucy. I had members of my congregation in Michigan. We had a lot of Norwegians out there, and one of our young ladies who's now in her 40s and is a really high-powered lawyer, got to play St. Lucy, so she was quite honored by that. So it's a way of honoring our heritage. We honor our heritage to remember where we came from. So as Christians, our family heritage is more than our literal mother and father. It's all those who came before us who share our faith. And the reason why we hold up people like St. Nicholas or St. Lucy, we remember them in the prayers of the church, is because they're role models for us. They're examples. Jesus is obviously God, so it's hard to feel like you can measure up to him. Peter, James, John, the apostles in general, Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of Jesus, all these women who actually knew Jesus, they had a great advantage we don't have. But people like Lucy, who lived in the 300s, she's functionally as far away from Jesus as we are. Yeah, we're further away in terms of years, but She no more knew Jesus than we do in terms of like having met him on the street. She got to know him the same way we did. Someone has preached the word to her. She's grown in her prayer life. She's come to recognize him and know him. We can live up to her example. Or like my favorite martyr, my favorite. If I was Catholic and took a different middle name at my confirmation, my middle name would be Lawrence. And I've always wondered whether Larry the Cucumber was named after Lawrence, because Saint Lawrence was a great guy. He was a deacon, and when he was when they rounded him up to kill him, or they rounded up the church, the emperor got convinced that the church had a lot of money. Well, what it had was a lot of people who were becoming Christians, and some of them had money, but the church didn't have any money. So the emperor grabbed a hold of Lawrence and said, "You've got 40, or I forget it was 24 or 48 hours to produce the riches of the church for me, or I'm going to kill you." So Lawrence's idea was, he said, "You want to know what the riches of the church was?" He took what little money they did have and gave it to all the poor people, and then he brought all the poor people out and paraded them up to the palace of the emperor and said, "Here's the church's riches, all these poor people. This is what makes us really rich." And the emperor said, "Ha ha, guess what? I'm going to kill you now." And so the way he killed him was, instead of like burning him at the stake, they decided to grill him alive like a hot dog. And his last words were, "Flip me over, I'm done on this side." Now that's a guy with some chutzpah. That's a guy I want to have that kind of courage in the face of calamity. So again, he's part of our heritage. We tell these stories so we can honor our fathers and mothers in the faith. This is about heritage, okay? So, we do this when we tell the stories of our own countries about why we should be patriots. That's why there's such a big fight going on in our culture right now between the 1619 idea and the 1776 idea, which is going to be the story we tell ourselves about ourselves. So that's what commandment number 4 is about. So honor your father and mother is about honoring your heritage. Remember where you came from and honor that, okay? In our case, this goes all the way back to Mount Sinai, okay, which is why we sing that in the second verse of O Come, Emmanuel. So what's the other thing about this promise? This is especially important. You're not going to find this with any other commandment in here. What happens in the second half? So it's honor your father and mother. Why?
So that your days may be long upon the land that
Yes.
God gave you.
Yes. Basically what God's saying is honoring your heritage is attached to you receiving its blessings. This is the only commandment with a promise. Or it's the first commandment with a promise. Okay? Up till now, it's just been do this, do this, do this, and now it's going to be do this so that this other thing happens. If you stop honoring your heritage, if you stop remembering, for instance, and what this means specifically, did you guys know what it took to be a Jew in the ancient world? If you were a man, there were two things. If there was a woman, there was one thing that made you a Jew. Participating in the Passover. Remember that this is the God who took you out of slavery in Egypt. That's what made you a Jew. The Passover meal becomes what for us? We'll learn more about this when we do this later in the book. But you guys had your First Communion training fairly recently. Do you remember when we talked about that? Like right at your baptism, we talked about this. We might have only mentioned it in passing because I was counting on doing it here. We'll do this year. Yeah, what it means is Passover meal for us becomes Holy Communion. So we do it by participating every year or every week. The Jews did it once a year. The primary day for us to do it is when? Which Christian festival is attached to Passover? Most important one of the year because of that. Easter. Yeah. So for Christians, if you don't go to Holy Communion at all any other time, go at Easter. Okay? Because it's in keeping with our heritage coming from Judaism that we participate in that meal together. Of course, if you're a guy, you also have to be circumcised as well as participate in the Passover. That's why there's two things for guys. Okay. So we're going to receive, by remembering our heritage, we receive the blessing of God. Okay. All right. Now we move on. You shall not murder. Number 5, right? So can we read it from Exodus, please?
Thou shalt not kill.
Full stop. Thou shalt not kill. What do you have?
You shall not murder.
There you go. And you can tell the more modern translation has that nuance of kill versus murder. Kill would be for any purpose, right? For any reason at all. Murder means in taking an innocent life. So it's not murder for a soldier who's been ordered to war to kill his enemy, because that person's putting themselves out there knowing they might get killed and trying to kill you. Okay, so that's what's different. We don't hurt the innocent. Why? Because this is actually a repetition of a commandment. God's already given this commandment. Do you have any idea when he first gave it? Noah's Ark. When they land, when Noah's Ark lands and they reestablish humanity after the flood, that's when God gives the command, you shall not kill anyone. You shall not murder, because humanity is made in my image, and that's why it's tied in. Okay? Because when you're killing somebody, you're actually doing your best to kill God, in a way. Okay? This is why this would have been not so very long ago, my grandparents' generation, so your great-grandparents' generation, would not be at all uncommon at a funeral to kiss the body as the last thing. It's called like the goodbye kiss or something like this. You're not kissing them because you love them. You're kissing them because they're made in God's image. The same reason why, if you have any of you have friends who are Orthodox or Eastern Rite Christians or Middle Eastern Christians, they have pictures. When you walk into church, instead of having stained glass windows, they have clear windows, and they have these little paintings, the icons like I have at my altar in my office. Well, the first thing they'll do, looks like a music stand when you first walk into church. There's one there. It's either the saint that the church is named after, or if it's a feast day like the baptism of Jesus, picture of Jesus' baptism. First thing they do is lean over and kiss the icon, and then they get ready for worship. Okay, they're not kissing a picture. They're kissing who's in the picture. And what they're doing is they're really, like, the idea is that it passes through to the person who would actually be receiving it if they were there. When you kiss a dead person, or even a living person, like traditionally, if you ever watch Russians, they do the double kiss on the cheeks, right? Even the men do this with each other. The reason why it's a greeting is that you're doing that because they're made in God's image, right? Russia was 1,000 years Orthodox before the Communist Revolution, so those cultural habits still hang on, okay? So yeah, we don't murder, we don't take innocent life, because humanity is made in God's image. Next one. Would you read the next verse for us?
You shall not commit adultery.
All right, again, full stop. I assume yours says the same thing, thou shalt not,
Thou
right?
shalt not commit adultery.
Right. Why not? But incidentally, this is great evidence that human beings didn't write this down, because people had more problems with this than just about anything else on this list except coveting, right? So human beings did not come up with this list. Why? Why is this a bad thing? Let's go at a practical level. What happens in situations where you have families breaking up? What happens? Don't have time for a whole class. Go ahead.
It's hard for the children.
It's very hard for the children. Yeah. In fact, every social pathology, from addiction to poor performance in school to real antisocial behavior that ends up in criminality, all of that stuff doubles or better just by parents separating while the kids are at home. Okay, so this is gonna remember, this is their constitution, right? Just by following this commandment about not committing adultery, Israel is going to be way more stable and have a better social structure than every other country where people are changing beds constantly. Okay. Yeah. It's also because again and again throughout Scripture, God's relationship with his people is pictured as a marriage. God's relationship with his people is a marriage. So sometimes when I invite you guys forward to communion, notice how I change what's called the invitation all the time, at least season to season, where I'll say, after we've all said the Lord's Prayer together, and then I'll hold up the bread and the wine, or sometimes I'll break the bread and hold it up and say some kind of invitation to come towards the table. I'm always changing it. Well, at least some of the year, I will use this image of, I'll say, come to the wedding supper of the Lamb. Okay, that comes from the book of Revelation. And who Jesus is marrying is not any one person. He's marrying the whole people of God. Okay, all of us together, not any of us individually. The church is his bride. So if you ever hear the phrase "the bride of Christ," that means the church. Okay, so yeah, this starts in the Old Testament. There's a poor prophet named Hosea in the Old Testament, and he has to marry a prostitute who keeps running around on him because it's what's called a prophetic sign act. He's enacting for people to see, this is what we're doing to God. We're basically sleeping around on God. Okay. So that's the reason why we're not allowed to commit adultery, is it images our connection with God, and we want to be faithful. God is always faithful to us. We break the covenant, but God's always faithful to us. So the best marriages are where they're true to each other, and that connection stays really tight, because that lets you show forth who God is to the world as his people. And the book of Ephesians is really explicit about that. The book of Ephesians directly compares a marriage to that kind of fidelity to God. All right, next one, please. For Exodus verse 15, please.
Thou shalt not steal.
Basics. What is not stealing? What are a couple of things that we learn from that idea of not stealing? What was the first thing it tells you about it? If you can steal something from somebody, if I could steal your book, what does that mean? Does that book belong to you or not? Yeah, it's yours. If I can steal it, it must mean it's yours. If I was taking it, if I took it from you and it was mine, I mean, I wouldn't be stealing it, right? So from the very beginning, this means that private property is supposed to be part of what we have. God gives us stuff not so we can hoard it, but so that we have responsibility for it. So that's what we call private property. It also means, though, that I can't take your property, because if I steal from you something, like let's say you guys know I've got my nice guitar in there. So that guitar cost me $1,000. Okay, my acoustic guitar did. And it was back when I was a student, so I was making about $8 an hour. No, maybe 12 by that point. Let's say $12 an hour. You know what? Let's say 10. We'll shoot the middle because it's easy to add up the math. So if you steal something from me that is worth $1,000, what have you actually stolen from me? You stole $1,000, but what does that $1,000 represent? Right. You're stealing my life in a small way, right? So if it took 100 hours of my life to earn the money for my guitar, you've just taken 100 hours of my life away, and I can't get those back. Okay. So this is a way of protecting against that and honoring the sacrifices we each make for the things we do, for the things for which we're responsible. Okay. All right. So flip over. We're going to finish out the 10 Commandments tonight, because I just want to get out of the commandments before we go into the new year. And let's look at the last 3 commandments. Corbin, is there an eraser on by that whiteboard over there? Is there? No, okay. If there's not, there might not be. That's why I was asking. I couldn't see around the divider. So. So what is our next commandment? What is number 8, please?
Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor.
Ah, yes. False witness. What does that mean?
Lying.
Yeah, lying. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Lying. Why? What's the issue? What does lying do to a person?
Trap them.
Say more. How's it trap them?
Because even with the white lie,
Mm-hmm.
it can lead to another thing.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll have to back up what happened, so they'll keep lying, and eventually it's going to be.
Yep.
Okay.
Excellent. Yep. What else? What are some other things?
I guess in some cases it can ruin.
Could what?
It can ruin your name.
Ruin your name. Yeah, exactly. Right. Do you want to do business with somebody who has a reputation for being dishonest? So someone tells a story about you that you're dishonest and it gets around the community and then people don't want to do business with you. That hurts your family. It hurts your ability to be a member of that society. Luther in the Large Catechism actually says this murders our neighbor's character. So you're not allowed to murder their body, but we also are not allowed to murder their character in the eyes of other people. Okay. Now, here's the hard part about it, especially, and this is something we forget. Yeah, it's definitely wrong to pass along something you know is a lie, but if you didn't actually see it, you don't know if it's not a lie. You could be helping to pass along a lie because you say, well, that seems like the kind of thing they would do. Well, maybe, but maybe not this time. And maybe you don't know them as well as you think. Maybe you have in your mind something that is their reputation when in fact they didn't really do any of those things in the first place. You've just got somebody who wants to be mean about them, right? Ladies, I know you're not really into social media, either of you, but this is a horrible thing, particularly for girls on social media. Guys tend to do their nasty stuff in video games. Girls tend to do it in social media, where they spread rumors about each other or imply things about each other. It's been quite difficult the last couple of years as social media has taken over in the world. So just seems to be the way this happens. So Luther says about this, we should fear love. We should fear and love God so we do not tell lies about our neighbor, betray him, slander him, or hurt his reputation, but defend him, speak well of him, and explain everything in the kindest way. And this is where Luther is so helpful for us in the Small Catechism. For every thou shalt not, there's a more important thou shalt. Okay? Shalt. Thou shalt, right? For every you shall not do this, there is a more important you shall do this. Okay? The two one implies the other. So you want to speak well of your neighbor. You actually can help them if someone has poisoned their reputation by saying something as simple as, well, I never saw them do anything like that. You actually help protect the people around you that way. Okay. How about the next verse, please? Corbin was our next commandment, rather, for Deuteronomy.
You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. You shall not set your desire on your neighbor's house or land.
Go ahead and stop there. So this is where it gets a little wonky, and I think I mentioned this to you guys before. There's actually kind of like 9 words, but the tradition is that there's 10 words, so we keep calling it the 10 Commandments, but it depends on how you break up the sentences, because in Hebrew, in ancient Hebrew in particular, there's not even any vowels, let alone any punctuation. Punctuation gets invented way later. So you have to tell from context where one thing breaks with another. So the way that Lutherans and Catholics and Anglicans break up the Ten Commandments here is that Commandment 9 is related to family. So you shall not desire or covet, right? Don't covet your neighbor's spouse. Because, of course, that eventually leads to adultery. So family relationships first, and then 10 is going to be for property. Okay? And yes, slaves were property in the ancient world. It's embarrassing to all of us in the modern world, but that's the truth of it. So you go from, you shall not desire your neighbor's wife, stop. So we're not going to tear apart families. And then the next one, you shall not desire your neighbor's house, field, servant, male servant, female servant, ox, donkey, anything that is your neighbor's. Okay. So the first thing is we don't break up families. And the second thing is we don't grab other things. And here's what coveting is about. So what would be if I said for every thou shalt not, there's a more positive thou shalt. What would be the positive for you shall not covet? So let me lead you a little bit here. What's the opposite of too little?
Too much.
Enough. There's never people will never feel like they have enough. People always, the richest people in the world are still trying to get more stuff. Until you feel like you have enough, you'll never be satisfied in life. The reason you don't want to look at your neighbor's stuff and go, I wish I had a car like that. All you're doing is saying, my car stinks. Right? You want to be satisfied with what you have in life, whether you have a little or a lot, and different, depending on what we go into in life, what we feel called to, we're going to have different kind of financial rewards attached to those things. Largely based if when things are sane, based on how much value we're adding to people's lives. Some people add a little tiny bit of value to a lot of people's lives, and some people add a lot of value to a very few people's lives. You're going to get richer doing the first than the second, okay? But not always. The world is kind of a fickle place in that way. But no matter how much you have or don't have, if you want to be happy, you want to be satisfied with what you do have. You count your blessings first. And if you're always desiring what someone else has, you'll never be happy with what you have. Okay? It also makes for a lot of dissension in your community, right? It makes for a lot of difficulty. If you're always unhappy, you're going to make your family unhappy, you're going to make your neighborhood unhappy. You can want something more without wanting what your neighbor has, all right? And I'll tell you a little Russian story about that. There's a famous economist who told this story. So the reason why what we call capitalism, I don't want to get into a big economic discussion here, but what we call capitalism wouldn't work in Russia at the time of the Bolshevik Revolution 120 years ago, or 105 years ago, or something like that. The reason why that wouldn't work then is that they had too much coveting going on. They couldn't be happy when their neighbor had something. So there's a story that a man finds an old lamp, rubs it, and the genie pops out. And he says, the genie, of course, asks him, what does he want for his first wish? He says, well, I have 100 goats. My neighbor Ivan has 1,000. So the genie says, oh, so you want me to give you 1,000 goats? He says, no, I want you to kill 900 of Ivan's. Okay, lowering everybody down to the same place. That covetousness, that desire, I have to have what they already have, lowers all of us down. Okay, so those are our 10 commandments. We don't want to gossip. We don't want to break the 8th. That's the 8th commandment. Desiring our neighbor's spouse. This also applies during the dating years of boyfriend, girlfriend, and all that stuff. Um, you know, all these things. God wants us to control our emotions. And so God's already pushing below the surface level. The first level is behavior, but we want to start paying attention to where our heart goes. Because it's going to make us not only unhappy, but it's going to make us a force for unhappiness in the world if we don't. All right? Okay. I think you guys were very